It was rare for me to find someone to whom I could relate my love of reading. A couple of my closest friends actually put me down for it. They both said the same thing, that I was living in a fantasy world because I couldn't deal with a real one. Thank you, Flea. I'm Samantha, and welcome to my February wrap-up. In February, I consumed 8 books, and I completed the TBR that I'd set myself for the beginning of the month. I will link to that somewhere. First read a book I ended up running out buying because I really liked them. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So this is the first Bardugo book I have read. I have not touched any of the Six of Crows book series or the Grisha trilogy or any of the other novels that she's put out there. I'm gonna put this down, it's wicked heavy. But anyway, this book follows a young woman named Alex Stern, and she is a new addition to Yale's underground societies. She was recruited because she has this really cool, we'll call it a talent, for being able to see ghosts. Not only seeing them, but she can interact with them. And they use this talent, they were trying to tailor her talents to make sure that she can oversee all of the secret societies that are real societies at Yale. Kind of cool. It is a very cool book. It is incredibly dark. It's violent and graphic. And I know, but I think those are the things that I really liked about the book. The characters themselves, everyone in there is really intense and kind of, and it has this non-likable quality to them. They're almost like gray area people, but yeah, they are. They're all gray area people. There's a lot of imagery and motifs surrounding Dante's Inferno. I think it made this extra cool layer to the story itself. So Alex, as well, she's trying to fit into Yale, and she clearly doesn't belong because she's not that type of student. She is also trying to run an investigation for a young woman's murder. She's trying to make sure that it wasn't actually one of the secret societies that is responsible for it, or multiple secret societies. She's just trying to get to the bottom of what happened and really make peace with this woman's death. And she's looking for someone else, which I can't really discuss at all because it would be a spoiler to the book. But and it's also something that's going to continue on with the series. So just a very brief overview. Very violent, very graphic, and there are a couple depictions of rape in this book. So if you are a survivor of sexual abuse, I do recommend heeding trigger warnings. Oh, and I gave this book 4 stars, or 4.5 stars. You may notice the lighting change just now, just because I am recording this part of the video long after I recorded everything else, just this book. I can't believe I forgot it. I was just out doing some errands and I realized I forgot my 8th book. How could I? Because it's a reread and I absolutely loved. And I started reading this physically while I was listening to Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So I was reading this all the while enjoying other books. I'm not really gonna review this book now because I've already done it for the January wrap-up. So I'm gonna recommend you watch that in order to get my love notes on it. This book basically just highlights why corporate philanthropy would be a very bad idea and that our world is ending. This is a cool, soft, speculative sci-fi novel, so I haven't changed my mind or rating on this at all. I absolutely loved it. I reread this book because I made a craft project which was inspired by this book. It is a macrame globe terrarium plant hanger type thingy, and it's adorable, and you can find that down below as well, so I recommend watching that. Now back to the rest of the books that I read this month. Next, I picked up another book that was not the easiest book to get through. Nonfiction this time. Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir about a young woman's life and how she managed to educate herself and go to school even though she was living under the rule of thumb of her survivalist family who is incredibly religious. This is a difficult book to consume because it depicts a lot of domestic violence, and it's just intense, and just know that going into this book. This book is emotionally jarring, and it's also kind of frustrating because you just want to shake people and yell at them, and you want something. You want justice for everybody that's involved, and you just feel so helpless. And that's how I felt about this book. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. It's so well written, especially considering she never went to school. She didn't go to public high school. She managed to educate herself and get her GED. She managed to get into Brigham Young University and then eventually make her way into Cambridge and then Harvard. This book left me with a lot of hope for people that can escape from situations, so I definitely recommend it. It's just, no, it's very frustrating. Next, I was fortunate to land an audiobook version of Where the Crawdads Sing by DELIA OWENS. There's an intense amount of praise that's going around for this book, and yeah, it's great. It's well written. I'm just starting to forget all of the details, and it hasn't even been 2 weeks yet, or it has been 2 weeks since I picked it up, and that's saying something. This book follows a young girl and how she is abandoned by her mother, and then slowly all of her siblings start leaving. Now this family lives in the marshes in South Carolina, I believe, and so she's left alone with her father, who was an abuser of her mother and the family. She manages on her own with him until one day he ups and leaves, and she has to take care of herself, and she tries to figure out how to fish and trade the fish for fuel and food and clothing. And then one day she meets a boy that she had known growing up, and he teaches her how to read and write. At the same time, this book follows another timeline in the late 60s in which a young man is found dead, and you know that the 2 stories will cross paths, but the mystery is, how did he die? Where did he come from? How did he get to that spot in the marsh? The book also has a courtroom drama in that later timeline, and it's a courtroom drama, so that's what it turns into. It kind of reminds me along the lines of To Kill a Mockingbird in a way. There's something about the dialogue that really turned me off on this book. It just didn't come off as authentic. It just felt like caricatures of Southern people. So I just didn't respond to it the way I think I should have. One of the things I absolutely loved about this book was that Kai herself, also known as the Marsh Girl, she becomes this kind of like an Audubon type character, and she's kind of like a natural history expert of the marshes themselves, and eventually becomes an author. And I absolutely loved that about this book, and I really, really, really wish that these books were real, because I want to look at them. Even though there are some elements to the book that I really liked, it wasn't enough to really keep my interest. And it's not a book that I feel so intensely about that I ended up dropping a star on my Goodreads list. So it went from 4 to 3, and that's where it shall stay. After those intense reads, I gravitated to one that I'd already read before as a palate cleanser of sorts. I read this about 2 or 3 years ago, and I absolutely adored it. It was 5 stars at that time. So The Story of My Teeth by VALERIA LUISELLI. This is still great. I loved this book. This book follows a man with janky teeth named Gustavo Sanchez, and he eventually becomes an auctioneer for miscellaneous oddities, and he goes by the name of Highway. So this book is really eclectic in a way. Highway is a collector of sorts, and he goes about auctioning off his treasures and other people's treasures and crap like that. They're oddities usually, and it's all about the story behind the item. Now, he eventually lands himself with a set of the teeth of Marilyn Monroe, and he has them installed into his own mouth. And then at some point he does go off and auction off his teeth themselves to help support a church. Now, this book is technically told in two parts. The first is from the perspective of Highway and his really interesting take on life. The second part of this book follows the perspective of another man who is tasked with writing the autobiography of Sanchez's teeth, because he does have this really interesting perspective on things, which you kind of find infectious. Well, I did anyway. But anyway, I did have this as a 5-star rating when I originally read it. I don't know if it was the audiobook itself that made me feel a little bit more detached to the story, but I ended up dropping a star just because I kept wandering in and out mentally and lost some interest here and there. But yeah, it's still a great read and I highly recommend it. It's a shorty too. It's only like a novella length or so. It's under 200 pages. So part of the reason why I listened to The Story of My Teeth was because it was narrated by the same guy from a book that was on my TBR, and I thought, oh hey, why don't I indulge in this? That would be from The Shadows by Juan José Melez. Now, on paper, the description of this book is hilarious and dark, and I thought I was going to be raving about this book for 5 stars. It follows a middle-aged man who's lost his job. He's caught stealing a tie clip one day, well, almost caught. He manages to escape by hiding in a giant wardrobe, which is sold and brought into these people's house, and he opts to just stay there because, I mean, why not? Now, after he's moved into this house, he is unseen and starts cleaning up after the family when they leave every day for work and school. It's weird. What I didn't respond well to was the way this book was delivered. It's partially written in the protagonist's head. He is basically retelling this story through an interview that's being taken place inside his head. So it's not a real thing at all, but also the perspective will switch and you'll actually see him doing these tasks. So it's a really bizarre POV conflict issue. You end up going on some really weird tangents which are completely unrelated to the story, and it's just, do we really need this detail? I was initially going to DNF this book, but I decided I just really couldn't put the book down until something actually happened. So I continued on, and you know, as dark as the ending was, I actually respond positively to that part, but it was still just too much. I feel like this book sheds mental illness and especially schizophrenia and dissociative disorders in a negative light, and I don't really think that it's a positive read. So I ended up rating this 2 stars. Now on to my quote of the month, which is sourced from Acid for the Children by Flea, aka Michael Peter Belzery. So Flea is the bassist for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I think he's in his 60s now, late 50s or early 60s. I'd have to look that up, but anyway, this is not a story about the creation of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and this really only goes up to his life up to the point when the band was established. This memoir follows all of the influences in his life, people, drugs, music, whatever it was, both positive and negative, and how it really formed him as a musician. I will admit that this was a title pickup for me because I'm not like a huge Red Hot Chili Peppers fan. I like them, but it's not like I have to like scramble to read it. I just thought the title was hilarious, and I thought, oh, I gotta read that. And I'm glad I did. The book is written in these little vignette essays about different events and topics that have happened in his life, and some could go on for pages, but there are some that are just like a paragraph or two. Even though I'm not like a super fan, I still found this really interesting because I don't really know a whole lot about anyone in the band. I do recall some stories of Anthony Kiedis, and I do really like the scene when the two of them actually meet, and it's cute. It's like a meet cute in a way. But anyway, I do love this book, and I recommend it. It's a really great celebrity memoir. And lastly, I finally finished Testaments by Margaret Atwood. This is a continuation of The Handmaid's Tale in a way. It takes place after the events of The Handmaid's Tale. Just a very brief on The Handmaid's Tale. It's a dystopian type society that basically just took women and stripped them of their rights. There's been an increase of birth defects and miscarries and women that just can't carry babies. And so the women that can breed, they're turned into what's called handmaids, and they can be, I want to say, sold off to rich people, commanders and their wives, and they are forced to breed for these people. This book doesn't actually follow any of the handmaids. It is the testimonies of 3 women, 2 young women, one that lives in Gilead as a, she comes from a family of wealth, and so you get to see what her life is like as someone in a position of power in a way. The other young woman in this book is living in Canada, and she's very much opposed to the way women are treated in Gilead and would very much like to see the destruction of that society. The third woman is actually, I'll call her a government employee, but she's resides in Gilead, and she is a woman of power, but she is what's called an aunt. She is a founding member of this new order that happens to come about after the events of The Handmaid's Tale. We get more of inside information of what's happening in Gilead, and you kind of see how the handmaids are perceived by other members in that, I want to call it a cult. You also have to deal with a lot of domestic issues, which are very frustrating to read, and it makes me wonder what the hell is going on in all the men's heads in that society. The ending is satisfying, and not to say that it ends well, but it's a nice conclusion. So Margaret Atwood shouldn't have to wait another 35 years to write another book, so hopefully this is the end. So this was a successful reading month, thankfully. I hope that you had a good reading month as well, but now it's time to look onward to March. I want to thank you so much for watching my video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and also like and share if you can, and you know, there's a little bell thing to click and stuff like that. But for now, that is it. I will be seeing you for my March TBR. Thank you so much for watching.